having a third-level grievance filed against her, which was the highest level grievance that could be filed against a student by her professors. She was taken into a room of professors and heads of the department, and for over 2.5 hours was interrogated and drilled, challenged on her Christianity in every way, and made a mockery of it. Now, what ends up happening, I said this actually ends up being a great ending. Emily ends up graduating. As soon as she graduated, she turned around and filed a lawsuit against the university. And the lawsuit ended up, the University of Tennessee got involved in terms of they were called in, the social working department of the University of Tennessee was called in to investigate what was happening in Missouri. Upon recommendation of those involved from the University of Tennessee, they recommended that the entire social working department be fired and that the university start from scratch, and that's exactly what happened. So right now, the University of Missouri, there is rebuilding their social work department from zero, starting over. Well, I could share with you literally hundreds of stories like this. Just today on my program, I had Matt Staver on the program with me. He, of course, is the head of Liberty Council. And we were discussing a case coming out of Florida, where a high school principal and the athletic director of that school, one having been in that school 30 years, the other 40 years in the same school, facing criminal charges for the horrendous crime of having a prayer before their meal at a luncheon. Facing, right now, criminal charges for praying over a meal at a luncheon. Now, y'all, you're probably familiar with cases like Proposition 8 in California. We can deal with what's happening there. The will of the people being trampled upon. I could talk to you about Gideons who are being arrested in various places across our country for simply standing peacefully on public sidewalks, giving Bibles to whoever requests them. We could talk about pastors in San Diego who are being threatened with arrest and criminalization for having a home Bible study. I mean, we could go on and on and on discussing what's happening in America. But the bottom line is this: we are in a war for our life. We're in a battle for the heart and soul of our country, and it is this far from coming straight to your home in your neighborhood. It is happening like a rash all across the board. Now, what is it that's creating this? Now, I'm sure, bottom line, we are in a spiritual battle. And it's a clash of worldviews. It's a clash in the spiritual realm like I'm sure none of us can really comprehend or imagine. But what we're also facing, just in terms of our getting our minds around this, is a government that increasingly is becoming hostile to you and me and to a Christian worldview. And that hostility is being expressed in a number of different ways. One of those is activist judges. Next slide. Activist judges. We're seeing many of the cases that I just went over with you were the result of judicial activism. Judges legislating from the bench, creating laws out of the blue. Creating laws just by their voice. And most of these judges are unelected and they serve for life. We're facing a horrendous problem in our country with judicial activism. We have I don't know if you caught this. This next slide is of the Washington, D.C. City Council. This is the City Council of Washington, D.C. They recently have trampled, just as in California and Washington and Oregon, we have seen it in recent months. Washington, D.C. City Council has just recently trampled upon the will of the people in Washington. There is a law in D.C. that forbids same-sex marriage. But out of the blue, The city council there said, well, we cannot break the law, but we can fully recognize and embrace, accept same-sex marriages from other parts of the country. You know, try to figure this. It is illegal in D.C. to get married in a same-sex relationship, but now it's okay to be married, just so long as you do it somewhere else and then come here. And you have full rights, full benefits, full acknowledgement. The people of D.C., fortunately, praise God, pastors in the Washington, D.C. area rose up against this. A huge outcry of the residents of D.C. And they signed petitions. The people literally jumped through every hoop there was to jump through to get this thing on the ballot for this November. And the D.C. City Council, after overwhelmingly the people made their voices known and did everything they were supposed to do constitutionally, the D.C. City Council said, we're not letting it go on the ballot. And what do you do about it? What can the people do? Y'all, we're losing our democracy. And again, I could give you examples like this is happening all across our country. All across our country. You'll recognize this next picture, I'm sure. Supreme Court Justice now, Sonia Sotomayor. Much can be said about her, but let me just jump to a Second Amendment case. While she was serving on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, she stated in a decision that the Second Amendment does not apply to states, and it is not a fundamental right to have and bear arms. It is not a fundamental right. God, the Second Amendment says it is. But out of the blue, judicial activism. And I don't care what the Constitution says. This is what I rule. End of discussion. Oh, we're seeing this kind of stuff all over the place. We're facing so many crimes. Let me, your faces, you're staring at me like, I don't know how to describe what I'm seeing here. Shock, which you should be shocked. Let me just give you let me toss you some good news in here. About a year or so ago, there were 33 pastors across America that stood up against the IRS to challenge the IRS code, challenging what pastors can and cannot say in the pulpit. I was privileged to be one of those 33. And just recently, the week before last, the IRS has dropped its charges against pastors and said, so far, they're saying our code is unconstitutional. Pastors are free to be engaged in the culture and deal with issues without threat of being punished for doing so. Y'all, listen, there is great news happening out there in the midst of an avalanche of horrendous, frightening news. So don't lose all hope, but realize what we're facing. One of the most dangerous pieces of legislation I believe we're facing in America today is hate crimes legislation. It is coming upon us like a bulldozer. Hate crimes legislation is just as though we have seen the IRS deal seemingly pushed aside. At the same time, hate crimes legislation is making its way in the church and in the pulpits across America. It has nothing to do with protecting an epidemic problem against the homosexual community in America. Y'all, let me tell you, FBI statistics, this is not for me, you go check it out yourself. The most recent stats that we have from the FBI on hate crimes is 2007, which just came out a few months ago. According to the FBI, in 2007, there were 1.4 million violent crimes in America. Of those 1.4 million violent crimes, less than 300 of them are classified as hate crimes against homosexuals because of sexual orientation. It was like 276 or something like that, out of 1.4 million violent crimes. Yo, that doesn't even register on a radar screen. That number comes to 0.0002. And yet we are seeing